I'm seeing everybody participating. Good job, Mason. And where have I put that video?
Hi everybody, Jonas Stenström here with Untamed Science and Rob Nelson Films, and I'm here on the beautiful west coast of Sweden. And we're here to get you started on your new digital SLR camera, and specifically we're here to talk about aperture, shutter speed and ISO settings. The reason why we want to do this video is that when we're out filming and taking pictures, we meet a lot of people that have these nice cameras, but they just don't know how to get started taking good pictures.
Camera right now, and maybe you can help me.
Sure. So that's why we want to go through some of the basic settings. I'm going to show you some examples with still images, pictures, but these settings apply just as well if you want to go ahead and shoot video. So I want to start with aperture. When we take a picture, we can adjust the size of the opening where light is coming in to hit the sensor, and that is the aperture. If you set it to a small hole, well, then you're gonna have a lot less light coming in hitting the sensor, of course, as opposed to having a larger hole. That makes sense, right?
The aperture, also called f-stop, is the number on your camera that usually goes from somewhere around 2.8, but it could be lower than this, and up to around 22 and sometimes higher. The range varies depending on your lens, but it's usually somewhere around these numbers.
What happens is, this might not make sense, but the smaller the number, the greater the opening is going to be. So the smaller the number, the more light is going to be able to hit the sensor.
This is because the number is actually a fraction. It doesn't say on the camera, but 2.8 actually means 1 over 2.8, and 22 is really 1 over 22.
Meaning that 1 over 2.8 is going to be larger than 1 over 22. You know your math, right? So that's how it works. The reason why this is important to understand and why we have that range is that you can dramatically affect the outcome of your image by changing the aperture. And specifically, you can adjust the depth of field.
Depth of field, or focal length, pretty much means how much of the depth of your image will be in focus. That is, how much in front and behind what you focus on will be crisp or blurry.
This is an example of a shallow depth of field.
The face is in focus, but everything in front and behind are blurred out.
This is an example of a large depth of field. I use the shallow depth of field a lot when I'm taking close-up photographs, and also if you look at a lot of the Hollywood movies, for example, and TV shows, you'll see that they use shallow depth of field a lot.
But when I'm taking, for example, landscape photographs, I like to extend my depth of field more, like this. So you can see how you can really affect the feel of the image by changing the depth of field.
And if this is your main priority when you're taking pictures or shooting video, I recommend shooting in what's called AV on most cameras, which is aperture priority. What happens then is that you will set your aperture, and then the camera will choose the best settings to fit that aperture mode. The next thing I want to bring up is shutter speed. So when you take a picture, you are exposing the sensor in the camera to the light in front of the camera. But you can actually affect the time that the sensor is exposed, and that is called the shutter speed. I want to begin by showing you a few examples of when you would like to have a long exposure and when you would like to have a short exposure.
It probably makes sense that you would need a long exposure, that is a long shutter speed, when the light is limited, for example if you're taking night pictures. But you can also use a longer shutter speed if you want to create special effects like motion blur. Just make sure you have the camera on a tripod so only the things moving becomes blurry. You need short exposures when things move fast, like in sports events, or in our case, wildlife. Just remember that shorter exposures also require more light.
And then remember that aperture and shutter speed relate to each other. Imagine this. You are taking a picture with a large depth of field, meaning that you have a high aperture number, say 20 for example, like this. That means that you have a really small opening that the light can come through.
If you have a small opening that is a high f-stop number, then you may have to give it a longer shutter speed if light is limited where you are. Because if you use a short shutter speed and have a small opening, then your photo might turn out dark, which means it is underexposed. The other extreme is if you want to take a photo with a small depth of field, then you might have to set your shutter speed to a faster shutter speed so you don't overexpose the image.
I mean, this obviously applies to all aperture numbers and different shutter speed settings, of course. You just have to find that sweet spot fitting that photo that you want to take.
If shutter speed is your main priority when taking pictures or shooting video, I suggest shooting in the TV mode on your camera, which is shutter speed priority. Then you will select the shutter speed that you want, and the camera will select the best aperture to fit that shutter speed.
And that brings me to the last thing I want to talk about, the ISO number. The ISO number is kind of the sensitivity of the sensor. And in cases like this, when it's getting a little bit dark, you might need to bump up the ISO. For instance, right now we're actually at an ISO of, what? 3200, which is pretty high for a normal digital SLR camera. Most first digital SLR cameras that you buy, if you bump it up to 3200, the image will be really grainy. I happen to be lucky enough to have a camera that can handle it, so I can shoot in conditions like this.
So the ISO kind of makes the sensor more sensitive to the available light. The setback is that as you increase the ISO, your image may start getting more and more grainy. For example, check out this really noisy footage that I shot in a swimming pool when I bumped up the ISO way too much. My simple recommendation is to shoot with an ISO number that is as low as possible with the aperture and shutter speed settings that you have chosen. How high you can go and still keep the image crisp depends on your camera and of course what you feel is acceptable. Sometimes it's of course better to come home with a grainy picture than nothing at all.
I hope with this video that you're going to feel a little bit more confident to play with the settings on your camera and maybe, turn it to the M setting, the manual setting, and play around with the aperture and the shutter speed and the ISO to experiment a little bit. Try and get the images that you want and change them up. That's always a good way to learn.
All right, everybody. I see most people are finished. A lot of you are super close. So wherever you're at, just go ahead and come back and join me. We're going to do a quick review of what we saw in that video, and then we'll do a couple of quick questions. So let's check this out real quick. Let's review this. Do I have anybody that wants to read today? Sweet. Take the mic. Jerem.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Aperture is the size of the opening. It allows light to come in to hit the sensor, also called f-stop. Smaller the number, the bigger the opening. Smaller the number, the more light that comes in. Vice versa. Depth of field is how much in front and behind that will be crisp or blurry. Shallow. Only the front is in focus. Large depth of field. Great for landscape. AV mode lets you set your aperture and it adjusts the rest of the settings.
Beautiful. Can I get a round of applause for Jerem? Can I get an applause from everybody? Yeah. Yes. Show your appreciation. Smiley faces, whatever you like to do. Show your appreciation. Thanks so much for your participation. And just a quick reminder, I am taking a look at that participation, and I'm kind of getting the impression that I might have some students in here who are multitasking, who might be in another class at the same time, and you're trying to do two things at once. I've been there. If that's you, if you're not participating, just put your away sign on. Put your away sign on so that we are not waiting for you to participate, and that way we kind of know that you're here but you're focused elsewhere. All right, next, can I get a volunteer to read this page? Let's go with Lexi.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Shutter speed. It's the time that the sensor is exposed. Long exposure when light is limited dark. Long exposure creates motion blur. Short exposure when things move fast. Short exposure requires bright lighting. Small f-stop will require long shutter speed. If you want a smaller depth of field shutter speed, TV mode equals shutter speed priority.
Yay, Lexi! Everybody give Lexi a hand. Woo! Good job, girl. Yay, thank you. Excellent. And then we have one more slide. Can I get a new reader for this one? Anybody brave enough to grab their mics today besides Jerem and Lexi? All right, Jerem, go ahead. Take it.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. ISO number. Sensitivity of the sensor. 3200 is high image will be grainy. Setbacks. As you increase it, it will get more grainy or noisy. Shoot with an ISO number as low as possible. How you can go with a crisp image depends on all the other factors: lighting, aperture, shutter speed, field of depth.
Awesome, thanks. And I noticed I left a word out that should say how low you can go. Let me see if I can type that in there really quick. How low you can go is what I meant to say. Let me just add that in there. There we go. Nice. How low you can go. Expand that. There we go. How low you can go will depend on everything else. And so I know that there is no, pardon the pun, but there is just no black and white to photography. Because you have to actually get your hands dirty and play around with it. So I want you guys who have digital cameras or even just regular cameras at home, you also have settings on your camera. You might have a sports setting. You'll notice there's a flower on your camera, or there's, I don't know, if you've looked at cameras before, you've seen them. Let me see if I can pull up an image really quick. Camera settings. See if I can get an image and just paste it on there real fast. Here's one. These are the kinds of things that you'll see on the most basic camera. It might be on your phone. Look in your settings. You might see these images, these symbols on your phone. So this is what it's kind of talking about here, how there is a flower, and then this one is like your sports. And then you have, you know, like portraiture, and so you have these different settings. Get in there and play around with them and see what they do. You can also go online and read about them. You can find information about your specific camera by Googling. Just a quick quiz here, everybody. Is this a short or long field of depth? Let's do an explosion or a waterfall. So chat it in, and then we'll hit enter. Oh yeah, you can just go ahead and chat it in if you want to. I was going to say, everybody hold your hitting enter until I say go. So everybody chat it in, give you 10 seconds. Do you think it's short or long field of depth? There you go, good. Everybody got that one right. Short or shallow, you can also hear it called. What about this next one, short or long field of depth? Love all the participation, yes. Good job. Next, long exposure or short exposure? If it's dark like this, are you going to need a long exposure or a short exposure? This one's a little bit tricky, huh? What does exposure mean? Exposure is the length of time the sensor has light hitting it. The length of time that the sensor has light hitting it. So if it's short, that means the light only hits it for an instant. If it's long, that means the light has time to hit it for a while, however long it may be. Whew. So what do you guys think? I only saw short, oh, I did see some longs, I missed them. Okay, so the answer to this one is long. You need a long exposure time when it's dark because there's not as much light. So you want to have that sensor getting light for a longer period of time. The longer the light hits the sensor, the more you'll get the light actually, you know, showing up in your photograph. if this were in the dark and you only have that sensor open for a fraction of a second, you might be lucky if you see a little dot of light. But if you want all of those details, the stars and everything, you want to have that exposure longer. Long exposure or short exposure on movement photos, guys? Long or short on movement? What makes sense? You want short. Yeah, this one for sports, you want short, okay? Because of the movement, if you do it for long, you know that by the time you got to capture this in just that second. You can already see the snowflakes blurring. That's because an exposure long enough that the camera actually picked up motion from point A to point B. That's what creates the blur. It's catching that snowflake from point A to point B. So you want that exposure time to be really short and fast so that you're just capturing that one fleeting fraction of a second. Yeah, class is up. High or low ISO? Yeah, this is tricky. It's the high ISO. Remember we said that the challenge with the ISO is that the higher it is, the more grainy it will be. So if you're getting a grainy picture, you need to lower your ISO.